Are you interested in moving to Europe but don't know where to start? Or have you started trying to do research and are feeling overwhelmed? Our new membership space, the We're Moving to Europe community, offers you a curated learning area where you can explore your potential pathways to moving in a strategic and methodical way, get support from other Americans who are planning their own moves, document your research, make progress at your own pace, and get expert insights along the way. As a member, you'll have access to monthly Moving to Europe classes on fresh topics with new resources and get the tools you need to track your progress. You'll also find reliable, up-to-date information organized so you can find what you need when you need it. You'll get practical, supportive, respectful guidance, useful feedback, and input on future courses and resources. You'll also get access to We're Moving to Europe podcast episodes a week before the general public. We can't tell you where you should move, but our community will offer you a process, resources, and support to help you make that decision for yourself and your family. Search for We're Moving to Europe at skool.com, that's SKOOL.com, or check the show notes of this episode for the link. Hello, hola, y bienvenidos. Welcome to this episode of We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. My young adult children and I all moved from Texas to different countries in Europe over the past few years, and my hope now is to help other Americans who want to move to Europe to plan and execute their research effectively so you can find the right fit without stressing out, wasting money, or losing time. Today, we're talking with Bethany, Quinn, and Jana Sanchez, who are two Americans who now live in the Netherlands, and they co-founded GTFO Tours to help other Americans explore and navigate the process of immigrating to other countries. Thank you both for being here, Bethany and Jana. It's great to talk to you all today.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having us.
Of course. Can we start by talking about your backgrounds? I'll let you decide who starts. Maybe, where did you come from in the U.S.? When did you move to the Netherlands? And how did y'all meet and decide to start this business?
Sure. I guess I moved to the Netherlands first. I moved to the Netherlands about 2.5 years ago at the end of 2022. I had a friend who was living here. She was here on the DAFT visa, which stands for the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty. It's a visa for American entrepreneurs, and it's very, very easy to get. And so she recommended that I moved here, and I came to Amsterdam to visit and fell in love with the city. It's just so peaceful, and I love the Netherlands. It's just a very easy country to live in, I would say, for Americans. So that's why I moved here, and then I'll let Jana take it from there.
Thank you. I concur with Bethany's opinion of the Netherlands. This is actually my second time living here. I made the decision to move back to the Netherlands on election night. I was so shocked and disappointed with the election results. And I knew that my Dutch husband no longer wanted to move to America, which he'd been planning to do. And I wanted to get out as well. So we made the decision that night to come back to the Netherlands. And we were on a plane on January 15th. So we got out before the inauguration, sort of symbolically. And my background, I actually had just moved back to the States in 2015 in time for the whole Trump situation to arise. And when he first got elected, I decided to fight and to resist. And I therefore ran for U.S. Congress in 2018. But this time I didn't feel that that was really an option anymore. I felt like too much of the democracy had been eroded to continue to fight safely from the U.S. So that's why I'm back, and I love it here. It's very peaceful, very, very easy to live here, and much more affordable than America in many ways. I live in Haarlem, which is a small city about 10 kilometers away from Amsterdam.
And did you all know each other before you reached the Netherlands, or did you all meet after you arrived?
We were both part of a DAFT support group online, and we met. I think Bethany reached out to me and said, "Oh, we should talk." We had a couple of calls. We had a couple of tapas meetings where we enjoyed some Spanish tapas and some wine, and then we talked about how we could work together. And this is how we came up with GTFO Tours. Bethany is the marketing brainstorm behind the name, which I love, and we just pooled our resources and began helping people who wanted to get out.
Yeah, I would just add, we had both been doing webinars on how Americans get out, different options and different places for them to live. Jana has a really great Facebook resource group where she has all kinds of articles on different places and different types of visas you can get.
So this is a business that's very new then. Yes, if you were on a plane in mid-January, did you start the business before you got to the Netherlands or
No, Bethany, remind me when we registered at the Kamer van Koophandel.
We registered in mid-March. We started talking about doing this in, I would say, February, really mid-February. And then, yeah, just things went quickly and have been great really since then.
And we had our first tour, our first group tour in May, right? May.
Yep.
Yep. And our next one in July.
Exactly.
Right. So the timing is perfect for the kind of momentum y'all are starting to build. So you both mentioned that you feel like Amsterdam is a more peaceful place, which I've been there a couple of times, and even just visiting as a tourist, that's definitely the vibe I got. I wasn't in the party areas, but it just felt like a place where you could just live. Why do Americans rather find the Netherlands so attractive, maybe compared to other destinations? And specifically, can you talk a little bit about the DAFT visa? Because that's something I looked into. And for a variety of reasons, it ended up not being for me. But it sounds like that is something that really works for a lot of Americans.
Absolutely. So I would say the Netherlands is sort of a hidden gem, right? I think a lot of Americans are looking to get out and they want to go somewhere where most people will speak English, or a lot of people will speak English. So they look at Canada, they look at the UK, they look at Ireland. But because those countries are so inundated with Americans, it's actually very difficult to move to those countries. And they don't really have many visa options for Americans to move there. So the Netherlands, 92% of the people here speak English. They speak it quite well. And they have this very easy visa to get. It's called the Dutch-American Friendship Treaty. Basically, you have to move here, get a place to live and register, and then put $4,500 in a business bank account. It's about, well, depending on how the dollar is doing on any given day, that's about $5,000. And that's really it to get the visa. It's a 2-year visa. You are not allowed to work for Dutch employers while you are here, work as an employee for Dutch employers. I think a lot of Americans sort of work in the gig economy. We have our own side hustles, we have our own companies, we're contractors, we're consultants, we're freelancers. And so the DAFT can be a relatively easy transition for a lot of people. And besides that, the Netherlands is just a really wonderful country to live in. When you look at the indices of kids here are the happiest kids in the world. They have the best pension system in the world. They have some of the highest life satisfaction. And I think it's because there's a lot of community here. And there's also a lot of, they don't have this culture of keeping up with the Joneses. And so you really can live here and not feel like, you're missing out on all the things.
Yeah. Jana, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's perfect. I think, well, maybe one thing I would add to that is that culturally, the Netherlands feels familiar to people because so many people speak English. And there are a lot of things from American culture that do come from Dutch culture. So I think it doesn't feel quite so foreign. I think especially at least when you first arrive, you don't really need to speak Dutch. You probably should learn it, but you don't really need to speak it. It's just a comfortable place to land.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like of all the non-Spanish speaking countries that I've been to, the Netherlands was by far the easiest to just get along in without knowing more than just the absolute bare bones of hello and thank you. So I'm tempted to ask a few follow-up questions about the DAFT visa, if we want to get into that now or maybe save that for later.
Yeah.
Okay, so with DAFT, do you have to submit any kind of a business plan, or do you have to are there income requirements that you have to prove or anything like that?
Nope.
Really? Okay.
So, a couple things. It's really easy, but also you don't need to submit a business plan. There's no minimum income you have to earn or demonstrate beforehand. And you can just turn up on a tourist visa as long as you can find a place to live, which I know we're going to talk at length about the difficulties with housing. You don't need to demonstrate that your business will be successful. You do have to support yourself because you can't rely on government's resources. And the cost of living is not as cheap in the Netherlands as it might be in some other countries in Europe. Most people will need a way to make a way to make a living. And that's also an area that Bethany helps with as an MBA and business strategist. She's able to help our clients develop a business plan. You might not even have a business plan. You can come without a business plan, without even knowing what you're going to do, and look around and research and then start a business as long as you have the money to support yourself while you're doing that. If you're planning for the long run to get permanent residency, there will be some minimum income requirements. And I think those it's either at 6 months or 9 months that you want to be able to demonstrate that you earn the Dutch minimum wage, which I think is about 1,700 euros, a little less than 1,700 euros a month. But it's really a visa that anybody who can support themselves through freelance or starting a business can do without a track record of doing so, as long as they can afford to live.
Yeah, so that's very different from some of the other entrepreneur visas that I've seen. Like one of our previous guests, Emily O'Meara, I think she said she had to invest like 30,000 euros in order to go to France on an entrepreneur visa. And then you get to find housing in Paris and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Generally speaking, for a lot of countries' entrepreneur visas, they want some kind of a business that's going to be helpful and important for what that country needs. So it's often things in healthcare, it's things in STEM, it's that kind of work. And they often are looking for a company that's venture backable. So a company where it's scalable. It's usually a tech-based company, something in that sector, so that this company can come in and start hiring people in the country is the idea.
Exactly. The idea that you're going to be a job creator on an entrepreneur visa is very different.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But here you can start a dog walking business. You can start a dog grooming business. I have friends here on the DAFT who sell aromatherapy at the market. We have friends who started a tour and van airport pickup business, and they're doing very well. So you can sell services in the local market as long as people want to buy them and you can support yourself. Any business that's legal is acceptable on the DAFT.
Okay, so this is all good to know. And it's interesting that DAFT visa amount is, I want to say that when I applied for my D8 visa for Portugal, which is a digital nomad visa, you had to demonstrate 3 times the minimum wage, which was over 3,000 euros a month. And that's monthly. And you needed a track record, you needed contracts, and you needed to have about a year's worth of living expenses posted up in a Portuguese bank account and a signed lease in Portugal while you waited in the US. So it's different. It sounds like there's a lot of logistical advantages to this, but there are probably challenges too. So can we talk about, how people plan?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things, and I'm going to talk about challenges that we've seen from our clients. So you do need to be entrepreneurial because you cannot get a job in the Dutch market. Although I will add one thing that we didn't mention yet is that when you come on the DAFT, your partner is allowed to work in the Dutch market. So sometimes what happens, your spouse will be the main breadwinner and will try to find a job in the Dutch market if they are particularly employable, if they're good with languages, they might be able to get a job in the Dutch market while you build your business. So sometimes there's a dual strategy, which is really helpful. While the DAFT recipient cannot work in the market, they must start a business or be a consultant or be a freelancer or, some other way of earning income than being an employee. The spouse can be an employee. So sometimes it turns out that your strategy with DAFT might be that your spouse would be the employee if they're in a market that there's a lot of demand for in the Netherlands. So being an entrepreneur is challenging for some people. They haven't done it before. I have friends who have never been an entrepreneur, and they find it very daunting, the idea that they have to live on their own resources, essentially. Now, another challenge is you've got to make sure your partner and your children want to come here and are going to be happy here. That's something that I see a lot, that where one partner is more excited than the other. Sometimes that's simply a matter of them getting here, and we're confident they will love it once they get here. But sometimes it's just making sure you're on the same page with your family, right? That's a challenge. The biggest challenge, which I know we're going to talk about at length, is about housing. Housing is not necessarily a lot more expensive than in the US. Most US cities, I think, have similar amounts of rent. However, it's very challenging to navigate the Dutch housing market because it is different. And I think Bethany's going to talk about that in a bit more detail. But schools are wonderful here, and you have the choice between public schools and being in the Dutch system, or private schools, which really education consultants only advise if you're only going to stay in the Netherlands for a year or two. So if you want to go to the Dutch schools, you need to go first to, it's basically an intensive Dutch language training course for a year, 6 months or a year. So your children go with all the other immigrants and learn Dutch, but they continue to study the subject matter that they're studying as well. So that is called taalschool. Taal means language. And so they'll do that for a while. But finding the school, so you've got the dual challenge of finding the housing and the school in the same location, right? So that's a bit of challenge that needs a bit of work beforehand, especially if your children have any special needs that require a certain kind of school that can help them with those special needs. You've got to be able to manage the tax and administration requirements of being a small business person or being a business person, as well as knowing what tax obligations you're going to have in the US and how to navigate that. I mean, for the most part, there's not dual taxation, but sometimes you need to be a bit clever about how you do things and do things in advance to prepare for that. There are some tax advantages if you come on the DAFT visa and you form a Dutch limited company called a BV in advance. You can get a pretty sizable tax reduction. It's called the 30% ruling, which means that the top 30% of your income is completely tax-free. It puts you into a lower tax bracket, but there are certain requirements, like you've got to know that you're going to have, they say, really 70,000 euros of income a year in order to make it worthwhile. But getting that tax break, you can't get it after you come here. So you've got to plan that in advance. You've got to set up the company in advance. You've got to hire yourself in advance from the company with a letter that will entitle you to the 30% ruling. And it also does things like make it easier to get a driver's license, because otherwise you need to take driving lessons and take the driving test, which is hard for a lot of people. They don't have the reciprocity here that a lot of other countries have, unless you have the 30% ruling. So there's some planning that needs to go in advance for a lot of people. You can absolutely just show up here and apply for the visa. But if you want to make sure that you're doing everything financially correct, you do need to do some research and understand what your best options are. You know, one of the things that we do in our tours and in our consulting is we make sure people speak to accountants, tax lawyers, immigration lawyers, Makelaars, which is what the Dutch word for realtors, and education consultants, also healthcare consultants who can explain the healthcare system, which is way better and way less expensive than the U.S. system, but requires navigating because it's not what you're used to.
So I would just add to that also, I think the part of the challenge, like you're saying, is you sort of have to do all of your adulting again, right? You have to sign up for a new bank account. You have to sign up for the visa. You have to sign up for insurance. And so I think bureaucratically it's a hurdle for, I think, some folks. I would also add that part of the reason that we work with our clients is because, it can be overwhelming. So we have checklists that we work through. I have a cash flow calculator that helps you figure out, how long your money's going to last, what your income's going to look like, what the taxes are going to look like, et cetera. And then the other thing, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your partner's job and employment here. I think you can keep a job in the US, and actually, I think it can be easier if you're able to do that. Your employer will likely need to comply with local laws, pay taxes here, etc. And then one of the other ways that you can do that, if that's too complicated for them, is to work with what's called an employer of record, or to work through a Dutch payroll company. So yeah, there are ways for you to keep a job in the US. And actually, I would say if you can do that, that's probably financially a better option. And in terms of working with US clients, when I first moved here, I was working as a recruiter. And the company that I worked with was on the East Coast. So I worked from 11 a.m. Central European time to 7 p.m. Central European time, which is 5 a.m. East Coast time to 1 p.m. East Coast time. So, that you do have that. As long as you have that overlap, you really can do your meetings and communicate what you need to. It gets more challenging if your clients or your employer is on the West Coast, because then there is no during the workday overlap.
Right. Yeah. Even if I guess, an hour behind y'all in Portugal, and my West Coast clients, it's like everything is like an early morning meeting for them and the last meeting of the day for me. And if I were any further east, it would be a huge challenge. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, especially if the American employer doesn't have a distributed workforce. If they're not used to managing time zones, you might need to have some serious planning discussions around that. I would like to shift gears, though, and talk about housing, because the property search process is very different in the Netherlands than what you might expect in the US. The requirements and the paperwork are different, and the housing stock is different. So I'm just going to turn it over to y'all and let y'all walk us through it.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say you need a miracle or a Makelaar, which is a real estate agent, essentially. And I recommend a Makelaar. It is very difficult to get housing in the Netherlands. The market is super competitive. I would say if you don't respond to an ad in most parts of the real estate market within the first hour that it's online, you're unlikely to even get a response. It's very difficult, again, without a real estate agent, if you don't have permanent employment and a Dutch income. I think they're really just looking for someone who has a regular income, probably. Savings are also super helpful, as you would imagine. And it's just a very competitive process. So having someone in your side who can make those calls, who have those relationships with the real estate agents, and who can get you in the door, and then also get you the information about what you're actually going to need to pay. Because even in the rental market, the prices often that people pay are often more than the list price.
Yeah, that sounds like the peak of the market back when I lived in Austin, where you'd have people like standing on the lawn to make offers on places. And I think this is good advice for the Netherlands, but I think any country you want to move to, you've got to work with a local property broker or an agent, because sellers and landlords don't necessarily want to or have the knowledge to manage a transaction or a contract that's going to involve different kinds of income, different residency status. It's just like outside their wheelhouse, and there's a million people who they don't need to go through that with in order to do their business.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things to this conversation as well, is that sometimes people have an unrealistic idea of what rents are because they go on to funda.nl and they see lots of apartments for rent at, 1,500 euros, but that's not realistic. Most of them are, first of all, not available. They haven't been for a long time. Or even if they were available, you probably wouldn't get them because there might be 500 people applying, and they're going to take the first 2 or 3 who have a Dutch work contract. So you're pretty much always competing in a higher market. And then the other thing, so I think having a realistic budget is important, and the budget does vary depending on the city or the town or village that you're looking in. And the other thing is you have to pitch yourself with a written proposal, essentially describing who you are and your family, and how you're going to pay the rent. And so it's really like a whole package that we don't think about as Americans. We think, okay, if the apartment's available and we can afford the rent, we would get the apartment. But it's really not like that. You really have to sell yourself because the landlord has a lot of options. And yes, I agree completely with Bethany that having a great Makelaar who you really can work with makes a difference. And that does cost money. You have to pay the Makelaar. But I think it's really essential. I wouldn't advise anyone to come here without the right budget for rental and the right budget for paying a Makelaar.
Yeah, I will say I did try to do it without a Makelaar, and it was a nightmare. It was sort of on and off for 6 months. We were trying to find places. We put in an offer on a number of places. I mean, there was one open house that we went to, and we asked the real estate agent, how much do you think this is going to go for? And he said, well, somebody already put in a proposal for $400 over the asking price, put in an offer for, I think, $500 over the asking price, and we didn't even hear back from them. And then eventually the way that I found an apartment was I met a woman at a bar in the neighborhood that I wanted to live in. And she happened to text me a couple days later and was like, hey, someone is leaving my building. Would you like me to connect you? And they wanted a handshake deal. So that was how I got my apartment in Amsterdam.
Oh, wow.
That's called a miracle.
Yes, that is a miracle.
I was going to say that is your only alternative to the Makelaar, it sounds like, is that kind of serendipity.
There's another DAFT recipient who did get a place without a real estate agent, but he applied to 100 different places. And then the place that he ended up getting is like 2 hours away in the middle of nowhere. And he definitely says he will be using a Makelaar the next time he tries to get a place.
Man. Okay, so that raises a good point, which is location. I was talking about this with a friend, like everybody thinks of that one iconic city in whatever country they're moving to. And so I think for a lot of Americans, Amsterdam is shorthand mentally for the entire Netherlands real estate market. But you can get around to a lot of like nice suburbs and smaller towns because the public transit is so good. So do you want to talk about like alternatives for people who don't want to compete for an apartment in the middle of Amsterdam?
Absolutely. So first of all, on our tour, we take people to all the main cities and give them a feel of all the main cities. They're based in Haarlem, where I live, which is a small city. And then we visit Utrecht, obviously Amsterdam, The Hague, Rotterdam. And then we also take them out to some small cities that are maybe 30 minutes by train from Amsterdam, where rent might be even half the price of Amsterdam, or at least 2/3 of the price of Amsterdam. And you'd have a lot more selection and less competition. And when we do a group or a personal tour, obviously we will tailor that to your needs. Like some people are interested in places like Maastricht and Eindhoven, which are big cities and lovely cities and which are easier. Well, Eindhoven is debatable because it's a big tech hub, but Maastricht, for instance, or Den Bosch or other major cities in the Netherlands are lovely places to live and have a lower cost of living, especially in terms of rent. So I think it's important that when you think about the Netherlands, you make sure you understand how different one place is to another. I mean, they're all wonderful places, but if you've got children who need to go to a Montessori or Dalton school, for instance, which are public schools that are more tailored for instance, special needs, that sort of thing, you want to look around which places have those kind of schools, for instance. You want to see which towns or cities have great and fast transport to the cities that you might be going to for work. Might not be Amsterdam, might be Rotterdam, depending on your field, or Eindhoven. I think it's important to really look around the Netherlands and get a feel for the different cities. And sometimes you just fall in love with different places. I visited one place on our tour in May that I'd never been to before. Actually, I had been there, but I didn't realize I'd been there. I'd only been onto the outskirts. But a small city called Hoorn, which has a beautiful coastline. It has wonderful housing. It's a beautiful historic center and affordable housing. I think a lot of people would love to live someplace like that. I mean, especially if you're a digital nomad and you can work from home, or you can sell your services in the town that you're in. People should think about those places because Amsterdam is not for everyone. Aside from the housing crisis, which is very severe in Amsterdam, it's also not everybody's cup of tea.
I will add to the housing crisis, it's very interesting because they do have such good social services here. And there really is such a safety net that it is absolutely very competitive to get housing. But there's actually very few, like, you don't see homeless people the way that you do in the United States.
No.
I still think I can count the number of homeless people I've seen since I moved here 2.5 years ago on my fingers. They do have a lot of social safety nets, so it's not, you might need to sleep on a friend's couch, but it really is, it's not a housing crisis the way that we think of it in the United States, but you do need a real estate agent.
Yes. They call it a housing crisis, but for me, it's maybe similar to, trying to find housing in any major U.S. city, especially places like LA and New York, Chicago, where you just simply have to be prepared to pay the market rate and follow the procedure of the market, right? So.
Exactly. Well, and the housing shortage is global. Any place that a person might actually want to live, there's not enough housing because we're not building fast enough. So, which is another reason to consider some of those really nice outlying areas. And then you can be in Amsterdam for a weekend or whatever, in an hour on the train. So, shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to ask, so let's say somebody is ready to move. They've been to the Netherlands a couple of times. Maybe they've worked there in the past, or maybe they haven't, but they feel ready. What's a reasonable timeline for someone who's certain that they want to move there? Like in terms of like planning, getting their paperwork, getting their finances, because I talk to a lot of people who are like, I want to move as soon as possible, like this year. And I'm like, well, if you want to move to Portugal, bureaucratically speaking, that may not happen. But so what's a reasonable timeline for the Netherlands?
So I think if you're like a young person who's already a digital nomad or a freelancer and you're coming on your own or maybe with a partner and your standards are lower and it's easier for you, you're just going to do the straight DAFT, you're not going to form a BV, you don't have children who need schools, it could be really fast. Like you could really get here fast. But if your situation is more complex, so let's say you do have a high income that you want to get a lower tax rate, or you're certain that you need a driver's license. You have children who need to find schools and you can't move them around once they get here. So you need to find housing and schools.
Yes.
And sort out your tax situation before you come. That could take a few months. So I think the timeline can be anything from tomorrow to a few months. It's certainly not, it's not the situation like you have with countries like Portugal and Spain where you're waiting, or France, Italy, where you're waiting for an embassy appointment and you have to get all the visa stuff approved. It's not that timeline. It's a shorter timeline, but you do have to be careful that you put the right work in advance, especially if your home situation is more complicated or your financial situation is more complicated, because you don't want to get here and discover that you're going to pay $50,000 more in tax this year because you didn't plan things properly, or you're now, you didn't think about the fact that you are going to have to take 10 driving lessons and, that you might not pass to get your driver's license, So I think the complexity of the move determines the timeline. It can be the fastest. It can be, you could literally hop on a plane and be here tomorrow and you could do it. But another factor is you probably want to have some of your documentation with an apostille stamp done already. That can take weeks or days, depending on where you live. And, so some of those things take time. But I think children and finances do complicate the move.
I think you can move to the Netherlands very quickly. The first step usually is getting rid of as much of your stuff as you can, right? So how long is it going to take you to sort through your stuff? Start with what you would put in a suitcase and then figure it out from there, because I think we're actually attached to a lot less of the stuff than you think you are. Yeah, I think, if you're going to be moving your furniture, that can be very expensive. If you're moving a significant amount of any more than, let's say, 2 or 3 pieces of furniture, you're probably looking at paying at least $10,000 for the shipping, probably more like 15.
Yeah. And will it fit in your new place?
Exactly. Will it fit? What kind of stairs are you going to need to take it up to get it up there? Also, we have furniture here. So, it's easier to get furniture once you get here, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it's if you're at a certain place in life, it's easy to say, well, you can move abroad and then move back, if it doesn't work, or you can bounce to another country or whatever. But for a lot of people, they might have the resources and the bandwidth to do one move. And so that's why it's important to know what they're going to do and take the time to plan. But I also think I see a lot of people who say, okay, well, I do want to move abroad, but I'm going to do it when I retire. Well, if retirement is 20 years away, those options may not still be available because the immigration landscape is always changing. Like different countries, like Italy, just tightened up their citizenship by descent rules, and you can't count on things being the same.
I even tell people who say, like, I need to work 5 more years to get my full pension. And I'm like, if you might not have 5 years. You might want to think about how you can make what your situation is work. If you are really afraid about what is happening in America, and I certainly am, and I know a lot of other people who are, I think you should prioritize getting out in a shorter timeline because you just won't have control over it if it's too late. I don't think a 20-year timeline makes no sense at all. And I think a lot of people are staying because they have elderly relatives. I understand that. But some people are staying because they want to wait until they retire. And that's really, in most cases, could be too late.
The other thing, I think I have friends who say, well, I have kids. It's not that simple. But I think, the real question that everyone needs to ask themselves is, what do you want your life to look like? What kind of a country do you want to live in? And what kind of a country do you want your kids to live in? And your retirement money may not go as far once you move here.
Right. Yeah, there's an opportunity cost to waiting on multiple levels.
The other thing I've heard people say is that they want to pay off their debt before they leave the US. I would highly recommend moving out of the US and then focusing on your debt for a couple of reasons. Number one, everyone I know in the US feels like they don't have enough money. I have clients who make well over 6 figures. I have clients who make much, much less than that. And no one feels like they have enough money in the US. I don't know what it is, whether it's the student debt, the credit card debt, whether it's the consumerism, whether it's the keeping up with the Joneses, but I don't know anyone in the United States who feels like they have enough money. I feel like most people here feel relatively secure, and there is a culture of saving. There is not a culture of debt in the Netherlands. And I think people are just much, much more content. And then the other piece about debt is that different countries have different credit systems. And so, everyone should pay their responsibilities and yada, yada, yada. There are actually laws preventing companies from sending your credit information abroad. And at least in the Netherlands, it's an income-based system to determine whether, for instance, they will give you a loan for a house. So it is a separate system. And I would move somewhere more affordable and then focus on figuring out what's reasonable for you to be able to pay off that debt.
Absolutely. Yeah. My fancy credit score was no good here when I was applying for a mortgage. They just wanted to see income, which, you think that I think a lot of us have these default assumptions that certain things are the same everywhere, and they're not. And that's something to take into consideration. I want to switch gears here in the last few minutes that we have left and talk about, especially you, Bethany, and you as well, Jana, because you had lived in the Netherlands before this most recent move. How do you recommend that new arrivals, say they're on the DAFT visa or some other thing like a student visa or a work contract, how do they start making the most of their new community? Like, what's the best way in the Dutch environment, with their particular culture and habits and practices? How do you recommend people get in and start making connections? Because that can be a challenge that a lot of people put off and they kind of stay in their expat bubble. And I think you miss out when you do that.
So I'm a big believer in community. Well, first, there are two types of cities in my experience. There are cities where people ask you where you went to school, and there are cities where people ask you where you're from and what brought you there. In the cities where people ask you where you went to school, it's usually a relatively cliquish city. People sort of already have their friends and are often not looking for new ones. Whereas in cities like Amsterdam, like Washington, D.C., there are enough new people in the city that people are often looking to make new friends, and it's a lot easier to make friends there. I think in the Netherlands, it's very easy to make expat friends, and expats are lovely. I made friends by meetup.com is a great source and a great place to find people who do similar things. I would also recommend joining the Facebook expat group. I see people saying, hey, I just moved to this town. Does somebody want to meet up for coffee or whatever? And then, yeah, I honestly met a bunch of my friends at bars. There was a board game bar where I met a lot of friends, but also my current partner. And yeah, I think it's really about meeting new people, keeping track of the people you've met. As an introvert, sometimes when I go to networking events, my goal will be to get contact information from a few people, and then I'll set up meetings with them afterwards. And that's sort of how I solidify those relationships a little bit more. And I like throwing dinner parties as well. I think that's a great way to bring people together and build community.
Yeah, I just add to that as someone with a Dutch partner. When I first lived here, I found it really hard to make Dutch friends because indeed people have their friends from university and from before that. And so it's hard to kind of get into those circles. But ultimately, I did make great Dutch friends who are still my friends after 20 years who came through my work. So I met people through my work who became friends, and pretty much everybody who I remained friends with was somebody connected to my work as a journalist and then as a PR when I lived here before. My circle is, I think, always expanding through my work, and I think that's true here as well as anywhere else. And if you have children, you're probably meeting the parents of your children's friends and classmates as well. So I think that's another way to meet Dutch people.
Okay, so for the last question that I have for each of you, personally, what has been or has there been a benefit to living in the Netherlands that when you arrived you didn't expect?
Yeah, so you probably know I moved with two dogs who were used to having a big backyard, and here I have a little house with a small roof terrace, no garden. So basically, my dogs require me to go out for walks like 4 times a day. So that's been a great health benefit as well. So I'm walking way more steps than I walked before. I also walked them in Fort Worth, but just in the morning, and then they spent the rest of the day running around the yard. So here I have to take them out many times in the day. I get a lot more steps in. I see parks that I hadn't seen before. I notice how green everything is. And I also meet a lot of shop owners and parents of other dogs. So what's been an unexpected benefit for me has just been the way that Dutch people allow dogs into their shops. My dogs even get to go into the cheese shop and into the bakery while I'm ordering my stuff. And I'm just really enjoying a new way of looking at the Netherlands from the eyes of a dog parent. So that's been really nice to see how welcome they are, and for me to go and explore more areas that I hadn't before.
That is lovely. And another way to build community. So Bethany, was there anything for you that took you by surprise?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sure. I mean, dating here has been really fantastic for me. I met, my now partner, who was really, really wonderful. But even before we met, I found dating here to be much nicer. I think people are a lot more emotionally balanced, and I think life is just so much easier here. It's very livable, and so I think people are able to give more of their attention, more of their bandwidth. I think it's much less of a numbers game. I think part of the problem with dating in the United States is that people simultaneously want to be treated like one in a million while treating everyone else like there are many fish in the sea. And I don't feel like it is like that here. I used a dating app called Breeze, which I believe is based in the Netherlands. And basically the concept is to get you to meet up with people much more quickly than you would without all of the sort of back and forth messaging. And so I really enjoyed using that app and meeting new people through that.
That's fantastic. Well, Jana Sanchez, Bethany Quinn of GTFO Tours in Haarlem in the Netherlands, thank you both so much for taking this hour to talk with us and talk about what it's like to plan a move to the Netherlands, what you need to know. And we will have your website and Bethany, the resource that you had mentioned. We'll have those things in the show notes so that people can reach out to you if they have any questions or want more information. And thank you again, both, so much for all of this.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you so much, Casey.
That's all for now. Thank you for listening to We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and/or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. Our producer and editor is Magdalena Lass, and our music was composed by Sage Barton. For more resources and to join the conversation, connect with us on Substack at We're Moving to Europe.